My name is Juan Pablo Echeverria. I am the co-chair of the Urban Ag Group for Fairfax County. And I'm also the Outreach and Education Manager for Arcadia, the Center for Sustainable Food and Agriculture. The Urban Ag Group, we're basically a group of people that meet once a month. And we come from, we have individual citizens, we have people that work for the county, we have people that work for universities, people just interested and in urban agriculture. And the idea is that we get together once a month and try to think of ways that we could expand urban agriculture in our county. I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow food in Fairfax County. And the Urban Ag Group has done some really interesting things from helping pass some local policy to allow front yard gardens, to working with schools and community centers to allow access to community gardens at the beginning of the pandemic when they were shut down. And one of the things we also value is trying to set up these workshops. We believe that this is a good and easy way to amplify our message and to get more people interested in urban agriculture and hopefully just learning to grow. And so this is a series of our spring workshops. 2 weeks ago, we did one on composting. And I think we're going to put the link of the recording of that session in the chat, just so that if you weren't able to see it or didn't know about it, then you can log on and learn a little bit about composting in Fairfax County. And so kind of like what we're hoping to do with these is, we log on for an hour, we talk gardens, we try to give you as many nuggets of information as possible, and hopefully you can put these into action in your own gardens and homes. And so I want to introduce today's presenter. His name is Elias Castillo. He is a local entrepreneur, gardener, and one of the cool things about him, he also has a YouTube channel focused specifically on growing food in Zone 7A, which is our region. And I believe you live in Springfield, is that correct?
Falls Church.
Falls Church, okay. And so if you Google anything about gardens in the internet, there's more information than anyone ever needs to know. But sometimes it's hard to find something that's like very local. And so I'm sure he'll share what his YouTube is. But I think it's awesome because it's very much focused on this region. He is originally from El Salvador, but he's been gardening in the DMV for about 12 years. His favorite things to grow are winter squash, which I commend him because I always struggle with winter squash, and fruit trees. And so how we're going to do this is Elias is going to talk for about 30 minutes. Then we're going to get two of our awesome local gardeners, Corey Sutter and Stacy Evers, to give very short little presentations on just like things that they do at home that they think are very important. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end to ask questions. So I would ask of everyone to wait to ask questions toward the very end. That means including the chat, just because it becomes a little distracting if that little window keeps popping up. But like maybe type in your question, and then once we open up for questions, you can just hit send, and we can try to answer as many questions. With us today is also Adria Bordas from the Virginia Cooperative Extension. She's here to check us, make sure we don't make up any gardening stories. But thank you, Adria, for supporting these workshops, and also for all the great work that VCE does in the community.
Anytime.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey guys, welcome, and thank you for joining us for an evening for gardening. I think it was a little hard for all of us to get inside and get on our computers to join in because it's such a beautiful day out there. But thank you for making that time to be with us today. So the plan for tonight is to talk about gardening. I'm going to talk about the essentials about gardening. So this is if you're a beginner gardener or intermediate gardener, this is going to be the class for you. Put together a little presentation. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys and I'm going to talk through the presentation. So I have a YouTube channel, and it's, if you search for me, it's Elias Castillo Garden. And I have been gardening for about 12 years in the DMV. And I got started gardening because I used to work at an organic grocery store, and they put up a seed rack. And I got interested about growing food then and there. And I didn't have a place to garden because I lived in an apartment at the time. So I actually signed up to be part of a community garden. And that's how I got my original plot. And that's how I started gardening. But I've also always kept a balcony garden or a patio garden. Wherever I lived, I have kept plants with me just so that I can have them very near me. So this, I'm going to split the session into two sections. One is going to be about raised bed gardening, which is for those people who have space at their house for raised beds, or for people who are able to get a plot at a community garden. And then I'm going to have a couple of slides for people who are going to be growing on pots and on their balconies. If you want to learn more in detail about all these topics that I'm going to talk about today, I suggest that you look me up on YouTube, and I'm doing videos there about how to start your seedlings how to start your seedlings for spring, or how to start them for fall, or how to start them for even winter. So I garden through the seasons. I pride myself in growing food year round, and believe it or not, our Zone7 gets a lot of good weather, and even in the snow, you could be growing some produce. I grow a lot of Asian greens and some carrots and some garlic during the winter. So you can definitely garden in our zone year round. You might not be out in the garden year round, but you can have plants in the garden year round. So let's talk about how to get started for the spring garden. So if you are a brand new gardener, I think the best way to start thinking about your garden is to make a list of food that you want to grow. And what kind of foods are you going to put in this list? I suggest that you put your favorite foods on this list, and you put your family's favorite foods on the list, because those are the foods that you want to grow. If you have if you have a picky eater, you might not want to grow those things that they're not going to eat, and they're more likely to get involved if you are growing their favorite vegetable. So think about the foods that you really want to eat this summer or this spring, and write them on a very nice and detailed list. The next thing you want to do is also grow something special. For example, one year I grew loofah gourds, and I was growing it in my garden plot. And to my surprise, a loofah gourd, you grow it. I'm from El Salvador, and then in El Salvador, we grow them for the sponge itself, and we never eat them. But I was gardening next to an Indian lady, and she came up to me and she said, "Oh, you know, we eat those in India, and these are totally edible." So sure enough, I started picking the young loofah gourds, and I started eating them as well. And to my surprise, they are in the squash family, and they are very easy to grow, and they are not bothered by the bugs that typically eat away at our zucchinis and the squashes that we grow. So not only are they loofah gourds that you can use in the fall, but you can also eat them, and they are prolific. So I would suggest that you think about something that you normally wouldn't grow, but think about growing something special. I also want you to imagine your garden and how it will look in your space. Think about the space that you have. Think about where the sun travels through your house. Look at the spaces, how the sun hits in the morning, how it hits in the middle of the day, and then how it hits the spot in the evening. To grow a garden, you need about 6 hours of sunlight. But if you don't get 6 hours of sunlight, you can still grow some leafy greens or other things that tolerate shade. So just be observant, walk out into your yard, look at how the sun is tracking on the sky and how it is lighting up your yard. Once you have a list of your favorite foods, you have made a map for the garden, and you have a design for your garden for the raised beds, I'd say you are ready to order your seeds. And ordering seeds is very exciting. And I think the first year we all buy more than we need, but you can go ahead and do it. It's okay to order more seeds than you can use, and you'll be able to reuse them next year. One of my favorite suppliers for seeds is Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. They are a local to us company. They are based out of Southern Virginia, and I have actually been growing with their seeds for about 12 years now. The great thing about Southern Exposure Seed Exchange is that they grow heirlooms and they encourage seed saving. So you can grow the seeds that they provide, and if you are lucky enough to save the seeds, you can continue to grow the same seeds year after year. For example, I think it was 2009 when I bought my first seeds from them, and I bought a packet of seeds that is called Evergreen Bunching Onions. And I planted those seeds in 2009, and they grew to be nice little plants. And the following year in the spring, they went to seed and they bloomed and they produced a ton of seeds. And I've saved those seeds and I reuse them every year to make my patch of green onions bigger and bigger every year. And I give away so many of those seeds because they are so prolific producing seeds. So if you're buying seeds, I recommend buying heirloom varieties because you can save seeds from those, and they are true to type, meaning those that are true to type. If you plant a tomato that is a beefsteak, and if it's an heirloom, when you save the seeds from that tomato, it will produce next year a beefsteak tomato. If you buy seeds that are hybrid, that's okay too, but if you save seeds from that tomato, then the next year it might be a different type of tomato. So just a tip there to look for heirloom seeds. So once you've made your list, you have made a garden plan and you have mapped out how your garden's gonna look, you're gonna create some raised beds, or you're gonna prep the soil or your pots for the garden. In this picture, you can see my community garden plot. And at this plot, I had created some raised beds. I like saving money and I look for free wood wherever I can. So I go on Craigslist or I go on Facebook Marketplace and I look for people who are getting rid of wood, and I just use the wood that they are using. Make sure that you look for heat treated wood. Typically, most wood nowadays is heat treated, but just look for something that's heat treated. If you buy it at the lumber yard or the hardware store, make sure you're looking for heat treated wood, so that way there's no chemicals in there that can get into your soil. The other thing that you're going to need is gardening soil. So for the gardening soil, I believe you can get, if you're doing for raised beds, you can get topsoil, which is fine. You can also work the soil that's already underneath you, and you can turn that soil over, and you can amend that soil with additional soil from the garden center, or you can use some potting soil as well, but potting soil can be a little bit pricey. Once you've turned your soil and you have it ready, at the very top, I would add an inch or so of compost. The compost will give you very nice nutrients and beneficial bacteria and insects that you need in your soil. The compost that I buy in our area is called Leaf Grow. I've been buying that for many years. is actually just decomposted leaves that fall in the fall, and the company takes them and it makes amazing compost with it, and it's really good to add to your garden. Every year, whenever I'm getting my garden ready, I buy more compost, or I put my own homemade compost on top of the beds to revitalize my nutrients and my soil. The other thing is that you're going to do is you're going to have to create some trellises. So if you are growing anything that likes to climb, like the climbing beans or peas, you're going to need a trellis. If you're growing tomatoes, you're going to need a cage. I actually like growing tomatoes on supports that are made out of cattle panel or rebar mesh. Those are sold at Home Depot or Lowe's, and you can create very nice vertical growing mediums for tomatoes that will stand. Tomato cages are great, but I actually end up using tomato cages for peppers mostly because they can support those perfectly. Other things that you can use to create supports are bamboo, but just make sure the bamboo is already dead and it's not spreading. And I would say other things that I have used in the past are actual branches and the wire fencing. I have used wire fencing to create rows where I plant peas or squash even. So you're going to need a little bit of that as well. So if you have a limited space, or if your garden is a little bit farther away from your house, you can create a container garden that is very near your house or in your patio or in a balcony, like you see here in my picture here. So I grew some tomatoes on my garden 1 year, and I've also grown many herbs and other spices on my garden as well. So to do container gardening, you're going to need good size containers. A good size container can be 5 gallons or up. That is my preference. You can use a little bit smaller containers if you like, maybe a 3-gallon container. But I think 5 gallons is going to be the best size to use. The most important part when doing container gardening is good soil. So you want to look for potting soil, and you want to buy compost, and you can get some of that leaf growth that we just talked about, and you can mix the two together. I usually buy a bag of potting soil and a bag of leaf grow, and I mix the two together, and then I add them to my pots. So that way you have a perfect ratio of growing medium for your plants. I've never had to fertilize my plants after going with this method, just because the compost provides good nutrients for the plants. If you're growing in containers, you're probably growing in an apartment, so you probably don't get to pick the best area, but that doesn't mean that you can't grow food. So just pick the area that gets the most sun out of that patio and put your pots there. For example, I put all of my pots at the very front of this patio, so it would get a ton of sun. And to be honest, this last apartment that I used to live in, it would only get about 4 hours of direct sunlight, and I was still able to grow very small peppers and small cherry tomatoes. So it is totally doable, and it's so rewarding. So you have to select small varieties to grow into this space in containers. I would say it's going to be really hard to grow a beefsteak tomato in a container, but it is totally doable if you get enough sun. So I have a list of plants that do really well in containers. And in this slide here, you can see the picture. I have collard greens, I have garlic chives growing, and I have green onions, and I have Chinese chives growing. So here are like the top plants that I use when I'm using containers in my garden. I like to grow cherry tomatoes. I like to grow salad greens, like leafy greens, spinach, bok choy. I also love doing radishes in containers. Radishes take about 30 days to produce from the time that you plant them, and they grow really fast. So that allows you to get multiple harvests out of one pot. The other thing I love containers for are herbs. Herbs are so easy to grow in containers because they don't get huge. Cilantro, parsley, thyme, and even rosemary grow well in containers in our area. I've even overwintered some of those herbs in pots in this area. So when I plant them in the fall around September, October, they get mature enough and then they hold on, and then they come out in the spring and they start producing right away. I also like to grow green onions and chives. And I have grown in this container, the red container you see here, I have grown Thai chili peppers, jalapenos, ají dulce peppers, and so many other things. So don't be discouraged if you have a small space. You can still grow a lot of food in a small space. So when you're thinking about gardening, you're gonna start thinking, when should I start my seeds? So if you bought the seeds from a reputable company, there is gonna be instructions in the back of each packet on when you should sow those seeds, either indoors or outdoors. So I like to sow indoors things that could benefit from a jump start in the season. For example, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, they need about 6 to 8 weeks to be a good size to be put out into the garden. So our last frost here in Zone 7 technically is April, late April. But I don't like to plant my stuff until Mother's Day because I have planted before Mother's Day before, and I have lost plants, and it is heartbreaking when you put out your plants too soon and you have a late frost that kills them. So I would always put out my tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants on Mother's Day. Some other plants, like summer plants that are like corn and squash, they grow really fast. So you want to start them only 4 to 2 weeks before the last frost. So those items like summer squashes, when you plant the seed, it grows very fast indoors. So you want to plant them only 4 to 2 weeks before the last frost. So we're talking probably April 15th. That's when you want to plant them indoors to be put out on Mother's Day. Another thing that if you're thinking about growing indoors, you can buy a set of LED lights on Amazon, or you can buy them at your local hardware store. I think they're critical to give your plants and seedlings the proper lighting that they need. For example, these are my plants that are growing indoors right now, and these are going to be my plants for this spring. And you can see that they are not leggy, meaning they are not reaching for the lights. You can, if you have a very sunny window, you can certainly grow some on a sunny window. But I have found that even with a very sunny window, you get leggy seedlings. So if you can afford it, just look for a nice set of LED lights and set them up on a tray and grow them and grow your plants under them. You can also direct sow into the ground. Direct sowing is actually one of my favorite methods for growing foods because it takes the least amount of effort. So there's cold weather crops that can take frosts. For example, spinach, lettuce, carrots, and peas. Those are considered cold weather crops because you can start planting them as soon as the soil in your garden warms up a little. And you can grow them before your last frost. So this is a way to use one bed for cold weather crops like spinach, you would plant spinach right about now. So March 15th, you can start planting your spinach, lettuce, carrots, and peas now. And you will get a harvest for spinach, you should be getting a harvest in about 45 days, 60 days. So right about May 15th, when you have to put in your summer crops, spinach, lettuce will be finishing up, and then you can use that same bed to grow your tomatoes. So it's great for succession planting. So these plants can be started from seeds directly outdoors. And I would say read the back of the packet and find out what the perfect spacing is for each seed and what the row spacing is. So the seed spacing means the space between each seed, and the row means what it sounds like, just the space between each row. So you want to follow those as much as you can to maximize the size of your vegetables. And that's okay. Some of the seeds are going to be very tiny, and you're going to put in more seeds that you want to put into one hole. But you can see my tiny little carrots on here on the side. I thin them out. And so whenever I plant carrots, I like to put 2 to 3 seeds per hole. And as they grow, they start pushing on each other. But I come through and I pick out the one that looks the smallest. And that gives the other ones a little bit more space to achieve the recommended spacing on the packages. So with gardening, there's going to be pests, but I suggest that you follow the following method. First, you want to observe the pest and identify it. So you observe the pest and you say, what is this little bug doing here? And how can I identify it? The best way to identify it is to take a picture, and take that picture and submit it on Google Lens and say, hey, what is this bug? And then determine what the action will be. For example, on this picture here, this little guy was eating all of my carrot tops. And I was thinking, this guy is a bad guy. He's eating all my carrots. But in fact, he is a butterfly, or eventually will become a butterfly. So if you see something eating your garden and you're like, oh, that's a beautiful bug that is going to turn into a butterfly, you better not kill it. Or at least if you're going to remove it from your crop that is edible and move it maybe to another space that you don't mind he munching on. So the way I like to garden, it's a method called permaculture. So we like to plant a lot of diversity into the beds to avoid pests. For example, if I'm growing tomatoes, and let's say I'm growing 4 tomato plants, I will not plant the 4 tomato plants together. I will choose 4 different spaces in my yard to plant my 4 tomatoes. That way, if a pest finds one tomato plant, it doesn't jump into the other very quickly. So interplanting plants of all sorts of types helps with this avoiding pests. The best method to deal with pests, if you must, is to handpick them. Because by removing them one by one, you are going to be taking them out early enough before it becomes a problem. And walking your garden every day or every evening as you're watering, taking care of them, just look underneath the leaves, check the underside and see if you see anything there. If you see eggs underneath a leaf, just pick the leaf and throw it into the compost, and that should get rid of the issue. If you can find the eggs before you find the mature insects, that's going to be really the best way to avoid an infestation. If you must use a pesticide, I suggest that you look for something that is organic or natural. And I rarely use pesticides, if at all, because the issue with pesticides, even the organic ones, they kill all bugs and they don't discriminate. So if you spray your plants with something, it will kill other bugs that you are not intending to kill. One of the pesticides that I do use sometimes is neem oil, and I very rarely use it, but it is very effective. So look for neem oil as a pest management. So the last thing I want to say to you guys is to enjoy the process in gardening. For example, for many years, I've been very focused on growing food items, but in the last few years, I've focused on growing food for the pollinators. So I've grown many flowers in the last few years, and thanks to my wife, she's been a great influence in growing more beautiful flowers in our yard, and we have been doing that for many years now. I would suggest that you join a local gardening Facebook group. It's going to be good for asking questions. If you join one of the local gardening groups, they can help you answer questions about pests, when to grow things, and what are the best methods for our area. So the other thing that you can do is follow a gardening TikTok account or Instagram account that does that. You can find more camaraderie there, and you can get inspired to do different things on there. I also have an Instagram if you want to look for me on there. It is called Garden Forage. I do videos about how to plant your seedlings and how to start seeds and many other things, and how to compost. Again, that is Garden Forage. And you can look for me on YouTube. If you just do a quick search, is my name, Elias Castillo Garden, and you can find me on YouTube. I also want to invite you guys to a local event that we are hosting with Grow a Row, Fairfax County. We are going to be doing a seed swap. So there's a lot of seeds that I have that I've been growing for many years that I want to share with other people. And this is going to be a public event. It's going to be at Tyson's Pimmet Library on March 26th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. If you have time, stop by and say hello, get some seeds. And I'm pretty sure Grow a Row at Fairfax County is going to have some seeds to give away as well. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And I hope you got some useful tips out of this presentation.
Thank you, Elias. That was great. We're going to ask Corey Sutter. He is a permaculture farmer who grew up in a Mennonite homestead, has been gardening for about 15 years. He's been a very active leader in urban agriculture in Fairfax since he moved here. And he's currently the Springfield's District Tree Commissioner. And one of the cool things about Corey is he just founded his new company called Lamb Mowers. You can look him up as landmowers.com, and that's Lamb as L-A-M-B mowers. And basically, if you need your lawn mowed, he'll bring out the cutest sheeps and lambs out to your place, and they will, take care of your weeds. So yeah, Corey, thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for all the cool stuff you do in our community. And yeah, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for that really kind introduction, Juan Pablo. I've got a lot to cover on gardening essentials, and so it's nice that you already introduced me. I don't have to say much about myself. This is a picture of me at age 7. So I guess that's 32 years ago. And this is my grandmother's garden. And what I wanted to illustrate, and this is my great-grandfather, who was an organic gardener as well. And this is him at age 98. And so what I wanted to illustrate is that then my grandmother is also now 98. When you fast forward almost 30 years, she's actually about to turn 101 this summer. So this picture is a couple years old. But what I wanted to point out is that those of us who garden tend to live a lot longer because we end up eating more vegetables. and we stay healthier by working in the garden. And so if you're looking for one more motivation to connect with the earth and grow your own food, just know you're going to have a longer, happier life. What do plants need to thrive? I'm guessing I feel a little bit bad that I wasn't here for all of Elias's presentation. We have guests from out of town, so I'm going to probably cover some of the same topics, but I'm going to focus mostly on soil building and some practical ways you can build soil here in Northern Virginia. Obviously, plants need oxygen to have photosynthesis or carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis, but they also need air at the root level. And that's really important. Sometimes a mistake early gardeners make is to compact the soil too much or add too much water to the soil where it gets so waterlogged that the roots literally drown because they don't have air to breathe. So not only does the leaf of the plant need to transpire or receive carbon dioxide through its pores, but also the plant's roots need to breathe. And so that's helpful to know. That's one reason historically gardeners have tilled their soil or fluffed up their soil, worked their soil to help get air into it and space for the plant's roots to dig in. We're going to talk a little bit about alternatives to tilling. Because I want to stay focused on, water and sunlight. Those are things that a gardener can control. And then the biggest thing a gardener has control over is helping improve the growth medium or the soil. So that's what I want to focus most on. 1 teaspoon of productive soil can have as many as 1 billion microbes in it. There's a complex ecosystem of life. There's nitrogen fixing bacteria that can actually help take nutrients from the soil and feed some of those nutrients and things that the plant needs to your plants. And so having really living soil can make your job as a gardener easier because the soil itself provides what your plants need. One of the simplest things that I keep in mind is that compost, which is decayed organic matter, had all of those macro and micronutrients that plants need. So the more we can add compost to our soil, whether you have a soil that maybe is too heavy clay, like we typically have in Northern Virginia, or soil that's too sandy, when you add compost to the soil, that compost provides the nutrients that plants need and improves that soil, both adding aeration and helping it clay. It makes clay more aerated, and it makes sand better at holding water, which is something that usually sandy soil wouldn't hold water very well. So any type of soil can be improved by adding compost. That should be, it's kind of a good gardener's rule of thumb. And one of the reasons we historically tilled soil is because when you till the soil, you break up all those microbes, nematodes, and anthropods, and you kill a lot of worms, and lots of creatures are killed by the tilling process, and all of their dead bodies decaying gives a burst of energy to plant growth. And so that works really well over a generation or a few years, but eventually, if you don't allow that soil health to replenish, you essentially create what happened in Oklahoma, a dust bowl. We need to give a chance for soil to replenish itself because we're losing topsoil at a rapid rate, especially in the Midwest, where there was this huge buildup of thousands of years of soil, and we've lost a lot of it because we aren't taking soil health seriously. And so as gardeners, we get to actually participate on our own land or in a community garden, protecting soil and making sure that we have the resources to continue to produce food. So you can see there that with tomatoes that are growing taller than my head, I've never tilled this soil in my garden. I don't do tilling. I sometimes will break up a little bit of soil right around where I plant the roots, but then I use mulches that worms then come up and feed on the mulches, decaying matter, and help till the soil for me. So again, the simplest thing to do with any soil is to add compost or organic matter, which compost is actually 50% carbon. So you're also sequestering carbon by adding organic matter to soil. Also, I like Elias, I'm a permaculture farmer, so I don't use any herbicides or pesticides. I know that any poison I might use on my garden is going to go up through the ecosystem. If I'm killing insects, then the birds that would naturally feed on those insects are probably also going to get killed. Just a lot. So I'm taking away the natural biodiversity balance of the ecosystem. So let me just show you a real simple recipe for creating a no-till gardening bed. I'm going to walk you through a couple different recipes. There's lots of different ways to do this. One of the simplest things you could do in a raised bed is just to put down a rectangle on top of grass, and then put down, just to make sure no sunlight gets through, a layer of cardboard, and then 12 inches of organic straw, and then 3 or 4 inches of compost, and you could grow really great plants in that. That's what I'm pictured here on the right. That was the recipe for that bed. I'll show a little bit more complex recipe, but this involves putting down cardboard right on top of grass. I selected a sunny spot in my front yard a couple years ago. This is my son Jonathan modeling, and I put a stake in the middle. I wanted a 10-foot circle. So then I used the rope and made a perfect circle. And I dug out a path, which is something optional that you can do. And immediately I didn't want to leave that soil bare. You can see that topsoil is pretty poor. I'm hitting clay only about 2 inches down. So this is definitely soil that needs some amendments to be able to really have productive vegetables growing in it. So I put down some sheep manure that was composted, maybe horse manure. I forget what type of manure that was, but I knew that there was weed seeds that were going to be in there and going to grow. So, and I knew also the grass would grow up through there because it was a thinner layer. I put down wood chips down on the other bare soil. And since I knew that weed seeds would start growing in this, I put down layers of cardboard so that they wouldn't be able to get sunlight. And the cardboard will decompose over about 4 to 6 weeks. But that amount of time helps prevent a huge amount of work later because you're preventing weeds from growing. And so then I just put down about 3 inches of compost right on top of there and started planting plants directly in that bed. So I used some different companion plants. This was an area I didn't in my front yard, so I didn't want to try to protect it from deer. So I tried to use a lot of like strong smelling herbs, like chives and parsley. And I did plant some rosemary and some bee balm, which is a really good oregano substitute in this bed. Also, you can see nasturtium there. Also ventured out and put in some different edible greens. I threw an eggplant in here to look extra pretty. And one of my favorite like edible landscaping plants that I have around my property, because it's just so hardy, and I had construction workers do work and accidentally dug up a bunch of these, and they were lying out for 2 days before I found them, and I put them back in the ground, and they're coming up again this year. They're doing just fine because they're a bulb that can store energy. So garlic chives can take a lot of abuse, and you can eat them almost year round. I grab some leaves. I just did this 2 days ago. I grabbed a bunch of garlic chive leaves and chopped them up in a lasagna. So they have really lovely white flowers in August and September. So it's a nice plant. There's lots of other plants that you can mix into front yard beds. Okra has beautiful flowers. I'm going kind of fast because I want to show you guys a couple of other techniques. Let's see. Let me make sure I'm not going to go over too much. Okay, so I use wood. A lot of waste materials, organic materials, are really great for growing plants. Some brassicas like broccoli don't do the best in these type of horticulture beds, but most gardening plants like my tomatoes and peppers really love this type of bed. And so essentially what I did is I would dig out, set aside the topsoil, take out the best soil, and then put down the logs. If you're putting in logs, you don't want to use locust or cedar because they don't rot. Black walnut can also have deadly chemicals in it that can kill some of your garden plants. So it's best to avoid black walnut, but most of your maple and oak and poplar, a lot of the woods that we have around here, redbud and so forth, all make wonderful horticulture beds. And I even put in some charred wood because that's a lot of extra carbon there in the soil. I put some more decomposed wood right on top. And then I put in some extra nitrogen-rich material. In this case, I have lots of animal manures. Animal manures can be found free here in Fairfax County. There's horse farms that will welcome you on like Craigslist to come and pick up a truckload or as much manure as you want if you shovel it yourself. There's another farmer that will sometimes bring in 10 yards, which is a very large quantity, and for like a $20 donation to him. So there's different resources that are available to get manure, and it's a wonderful gardening resource. You could also do grass clippings, something that's rich in nitrogen, or just compost. And to illustrate how well that works, that's my younger son, Caleb. I put manure on an old tree stump in my yard that was starting to rot a little bit. And 2 years later, I was pulling out really rich black soil, which is wonderful to grow things in. The clumps of sod, I was throwing those around the perimeter, but sometimes it's easier just to make a bed, like put a wood border or a tree border. You can check the pH and then add. A lot of times we have a very acidic soil here in Fairfax County, so it's often helpful to add either lime or wood ashes to get the pH up a little bit. But tomatoes grow really well in our acidic soil. Blueberries grow really great here. But certain crops require the pH to be above 6.5. So you can buy a really simple like pH thermometer for maybe $12 or so at some gardening stores. And those work well, or you can get a more formal soil test, which I'd highly recommend through Adria Bordas, the Virginia Cooperative Extension. So I put veteran compost here. Okay, so I did this twice. I'm just showing you again. Put down wood in a hole, put decomposed wood on top, added some grass clippings this time, and used the clumps of sod to help hold it together before I put in the edging, and put topsoil on top. And I planted in that year. There you can see me doing my soil test and adding a little bit of wood edge to get the pH up. Yeah, I put down some stone edging in this particular bed. Stone can often be found for free at construction sites here in the county, if you know someone that's digging somewhere. And sometimes, like Craigslist, there will be contractors that are willing to bring you rocks. Yep, so I planted it. Sometimes I'll loosen the soil right where I'm planting seeds. One trick I like to use is to put vermiculite on top of like fine seeds, like when I'm growing lettuce in a bed like this. So I'm going kind of fast because I was only given a limited amount of time, but wanted to show you guys some pictures of this. Wood chips. There's some tomatoes we got from that bed that one year, following year. And there's another view of that bed and just how happy the mustard greens were that spring. You can see I planted onions and edible flowers and lettuce there. Here's another picture of a horticulture bed that I planted here at the back of my house. Oh, those beautiful yellow flowers here on the left. There's some buttercups up front that I let grow, but that's kale. And there's lots of other edible plants that also produce nice flowers. You can even eat Stelladora daylilies, and that's always my recommendation. Like if you feel overwhelmed by starting with just one annual garden bed, or you can also plant herbs and other like blueberry bushes or other edible landscaping plants around your homes. It's always great to have some fresh food that you grow in your diet. So if you have a lot of shade in your yard, something I would highly recommend are, it takes a long time to grow, but they are absolutely amazing, are fresh pawpaws. The reason you can't buy this giant mango-like fruit in the store is that tastes like a really rich, delicious custard is because they spoil usually within 1 to 3 days of picking them. So they're not real suitable for the grocery industry. And a lot of food that's grown in grocery stores is designed for long shelf life instead of nutrients or flavor. So that's one of the reasons I love gardening. It's because my kids, I guess you saw that my boys are 5 and 9 now. And if I bring a vegetable to the table, they ask, "Daddy, did you grow this?" And if I grew it, they're going to eat it, and they usually love it. If I didn't grow it, it's hit or miss because it's hard to find food that tastes nearly as good as what you can grow yourself. It's perfectly fresh. You pick it right before you serve it. There's another really easy tree to grow that I have a couple of these that are really productive at Daniel's Friend Peace Church in Fairfax City. They're Japanese plums, and we don't do any spraying. I did a tiny bit of pruning this year to take off some of the damage from the cicadas, but besides that, those trees have just, we put them in once and they're producing plums every year. So I'm a big fan of Japanese plums as far as an easy fruit tree for a beginner. If you're looking for more resources, I can't recommend highly enough to learn about seed saving. That's the way that we pass on genetics to seeds. And I think my good friend Stacy is going to talk a little bit more about that in a sec. And there's a really good workshop that's found at fairfaxcounty.gov/food council/urban agriculture. We are still working on updating that website to make it even more user-friendly, but there's still a lot of resources there. If you click around in some of the links, the planting, maintaining edible garden resource guide has a lot of great links, including a copy of my edible landscaping presentation if that interests you. And there's also another workshop on front yard gardening. So thank you very much for coming out. Sorry I couldn't be here with you guys longer, but Juan Pablo, I'll turn it back to you. And did you want me to take any questions before I go?
I think we'll try to do a little questions at the end, but I want to give Stacy a chance to talk. Corey, thank you for your presentation. Corey is just like such a wealth of information. And so I think giving you 10 minutes was never enough, but I appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to join us. And like everyone, check out lambmowers.com. It's a very cool, innovative new business. Yeah, thank you, Corey. Yeah, I want to present now Stacy Evers. She is our co-chair with the Urban Ag Group. She has taught environmental ed at Belvedere Elementary for 10 years. She's also the co-founder and chair of Hands on Harvest. Also just one of these really amazing people that are really doing a lot for promoting urban agriculture in Fairfax County. And I'm really thankful she picked this topic of dealing with pests in the garden, because I think we all suffer from those, especially from these cute but not as welcomed critters like the squirrel that we see there. So yeah, thank you, Stacy, and you can go ahead.
I'll just go. Okay, can everyone hear me all right? So thank you for hanging in, and thanks for being on the call tonight. My name's Stacy Evers. I'm with Hands on Harvest, which used to be Grow Row FC, and then we grew up and got into nonprofit status. And so now we go by Hands on Harvest. And I actually saw some growers on here tonight. So thank you all for being here. It's really great to see your names and some of your faces. So I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about dealing with pests. This is not an official anything. It's just stuff that I do at home that works. And some of it you're going to have heard. It's like Elias and I like coordinated, but we really didn't. So number one, the bowl of water is my favorite thing to use in the garden. I totally endorse what Elias said about going out and hand picking. I take a bowl of water, and it's like, I love gardening because it's kind of like Christmas morning. You go out and you don't know like what you're going to find under the tree, except it's in your yard. And it's always awesome when it's a new plant, but not great when it's a bug. And so I like to go out every morning and just like start just flicking them off and putting them in. The soap's important because it gets rid of the surface tension. Otherwise, the bugs are just gonna float on top. But I really recommend just starting early, making that part of your gardening practice is just get them, and you can stop infestations that way by just flicking bugs around. And if you work with kids like I do, a lot of them like this job. Second is aeration. It's just really important for like preventing diseases. It also makes it easier to see the bugs or the insects. If you're aerating, I like to grow vertically. These are really simple. There's a lot you've heard Elias and Corey say about just simple stuff, easy materials. And this was just a parent at my school actually threw these together with apparently some extra wood he had lying around the garage. But they pull up the plants, and then this over here is cucumbers, and this just really helps me be able to identify if there are cucumber beetles. It spreads out the plant, it gives it some room. Ignore the mustard that's in the back that's completely overgrown. Also, another thing I like to do is to plant later. I discovered this by accident, and I started planting my squash in June by seed. I like direct seeding squash, and I've had like no bugs. I've done it the last 2 years, and they've just gotten nothing. And just because I think they're just coming in a little bit later, and I've talked to other gardeners who plant later, and they've said the same thing. It's just, I don't know if it's just coming in a little bit later than the population. And so you can miss some things that way. Plant herbs and native flowers, you've already heard that, but I just can't recommend that enough. The red is pineapple sage, and the purple in the bottom right is hummingbird hyssop, which are herbs, but these attract beneficial insects. They attract birds. You always hear also about planting things like marigolds and garlic, which sometimes even the four-legged animals don't care for. But it makes a huge difference in the garden to have this mix and the biodiversity. You're just feeding a lot more and bringing in beneficials into your garden. And I also like to plant them in containers. Sometimes, I don't, but some, because then I can move them around if I need to, or if I want a certain area to get a little more pollination. If I've got something coming in, I can move the plants over. So I recommend that. And I think there was some talking too about interplanting, and I definitely endorse that too, the way that the plants can work together and protect one another. I also just think, sometimes it works to let nature do its thing. So on the left, we have, some of you probably know this, a tomato hornworm. The right is also a tomato hornworm, but it's serving as a hotel right now, or a nursery would actually be the better way to put it. These are the eggs of the braconid wasp, and they are parasitizing this caterpillar, and then the larva is going to be born and kind of eat them inside out. It's, nature just doesn't really care so much, but sometimes it just works to leave the hornworm and let the wasps come in and lay their eggs, because these wasps also will lay their eggs on cabbage worms. They'll eat aphids. They're just a natural control. And so as long as they're not out of control, just let them invite those wasps in. Physical barriers. So the story on these are little tents that I had to get, and they collapse and they're easy to store. And somebody who's more talented than I am can probably just make these from scrap. But this was a third attempt to grow sunflowers. I planted the sunflowers outside, and somebody ate them all. And it could have been chipmunks, it could have been squirrels, it could have been birds, who knows. So then I started them inside when they all got eaten. Started them inside. When they were a few inches tall, I moved them out. They all got eaten. So I was like, all right, that's it. So I put them outside and I covered them under tents. And the third time was the charm. So they grew to be 11 to 12 feet tall. So, but I had to really protect them. But it worked finally. Another thing is I like to use tents. I'm a big fan of tents. I bought this particular tent. It's off gardeners, it's just pipe and a plastic cover, and it also comes with a second cover that's a screen, and it's like more like a netting, and it could be like for shade, but it can also keep insects out when you are like your cucumbers are growing and you don't want the cucumber beetles. You can put the covers on them. And I think it'd be easy to make this with PVC pipe and just sew together some netting over it too. I think there's, a lot that you can do just on your own. It doesn't have to be fancy. Chicken wire is a good friend of mine, and I have gone, for reasons I'll explain later, to like in some summers I've had to individually put chicken wrap around every bed just to protect each one. And I have never bought chicken wire. It's always on Buy Nothing or Free Cycle or Next Door or some gardener, or the neighbor who's cleaning out their garage. And there's just so much stuff that you can get for free. And then this is not mine, but I just thought this was a cool thing that I could aspire to someday, where somebody's taken wood and they've made a frame, and then they've put the chicken wire around it, but it's so that they can completely lift that off very simply, but it's an easy way to protect, kind of like the tents that I use, but probably much, it's just really just with materials that you might have. Also, sometimes just being unpredictable to the wildlife. I had a student who was trying to grow this is milkweed, and there's a couple tomato plants in there, but they've been eaten quite a bit, and he was getting really frustrated. So we just went into the school shed to see what was in there, and it was there was some cordage and some stakes, you can see, and then some of this flag material, and we just covered it. He went to town covering it with flags, and the deer never did come back and bug this. And I think they were just a little freaked out by what was happening. In fact, nobody came and bothered this. So it was good all the way around. And then dogs. These are my two dogs, and they're a wonderful defense. And they really kind of in a nasty way go after the 2- and 4-legged animals. And so they're one of my greatest ways of keeping pests out of my yard. But the bad part is that they are my number 1 and number 2 pests. And you can see from these pictures, they have done a fair amount of digging. They dig and they dig. And this is under trying to get to the compost bin. And we joke that our dogs are trying to be composters. They love composting. There's a straw bale and some milk cartons and a double fence and both of them can fit in this hole. So what I've done with them, and hopefully none of you will have to do with this with deer, is just putting up a large fence. This is a double layer of fence, but all of this was free. The milk cartons are now gone, but we've threaded a pole through here to keep this gate closed, and they can't get into this anymore because we've dug the fence under the ground, actually several inches. This is the backside of the compost. And I have to say, I have never had anything in, this is the actual compost bin. I have never had anything in the compost bin and caused trouble in the compost bin, probably because of the dogs. But the dogs, they try to get under the compost bin all the time. So I'm kind of mixed on whether I'm recommending dogs to you or not. And this just today, I had to put up this fencing because I noticed that I'm trying to grow some kale and lettuce in here, and they keep walking through. I keep finding their paw prints. I'm not finding deer tracks, and I'm not finding rabbits, just dog prints. So I'm hoping that this will keep them out. So those are some really basic tips on how to real practical and easy round the house ways to keep pests out of your yard unless you invited them in like these two. This is my information hands-on harvest. As Elias mentioned, we're hosting a seed swap March 26th, 11:30 to 12:30 at Tyson's Pimment Library. Everyone is welcome. I also wanted to second what Elias said about Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. I'm a huge fan of them. I also love them because everything they have is a mid-Atlantic seed, so it's conditioned for this area. It's adapted to this area. We Hands-on Harvest had a partnership with moms organic market, and they gave us all of their seeds, and what they sell is Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. They gave us all their seeds that didn't sell in 2021 from all 29 stores. So we have thousands of seed packets from them, and like boxes, like massive, huge boxes that they gave us. So come to the seed swap. We've got lots. You can also online, we've got on our website, you can also put in requests and volunteer. And really, we give seeds, mentorship, and transplants to gardeners of all experience levels, wherever they garden. We help schools, we help community gardens, we help backyard gardeners. And all we ask is that you donate some of the produce, because we're really trying to help boost food access to everyone. And we would love to see you, Elias and I would love to see you at the library later this month. So that's it. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now.
All right, that was awesome, Stacy. Thank you. I have a dog, and she knows to stay out of the beds. Maybe she could train your dogs one day, figure out how to stay out of your garden.
If they do that, that'd be so awesome. She'll probably give them bad habits, though.
All right, yeah, she's got a few. Yeah, so now we just wanted to give maybe like 10 minutes. We're a little over the time, but we definitely want to answer some of your questions. And as you can see, we have plenty of garden experts on this meeting to answer any questions you have. And so if you want to type your questions in, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask the questions, yeah, please, this is the time. All right. How do you apply permaculture to planting in containers? It is just about, is it just how you group the containers by each other, or would you recommend planting different varieties in the same container? Sorry, I struggled to read that. Elias?
So I would say with permaculture, you want to plant a lot of co-plants, I guess, a lot of partner plants. So I think in container gardener, if it's a small container, maybe if it's like 14 inches by 14 inches, just do one variety of vegetable per container and just put them together. Just don't do 5 of the same plant. Just do different plants in each container.
Yeah, that's a good one. Definitely, you know, when you have a garden, you want to have variety in the things you'll be able to eat. And so definitely try to include different plants in your garden. Stacy, there was a question that what was the red plant in your presentation?
An apple sage, and it's a fabulous, it's an herb and it gets huge. And the thing that's super fantastic is it doesn't start blooming until usually like late August or early September. So when everything else is dying, it pops up with that like incredible color and stays until frost.
Another question is, how do we deter groundhogs? At Arcadia, we have that issue. We've even named our educational garden after them because they're so present. And what we've done is just that picture that Stacy had in her presentation with the wooden cages. That's been what has worked for us. They can definitely get in there and eat all their stuff, but creating some type of fencing is a good way to protect them. They're not very good climbers, but they can get through things. When using tents, does that get in the way of pollinators is a question?
Yeah, so what you have to do is you can either hand pollinate or you open up the tent or remove the tent just for that period that you're wanting the pollination to occur. And then you close it, you can close it back up.
Okay. Yeah, what goes underneath the cardboard? That was a question, I think, for Corey. I don't know if he's still on, but usually what you do there is, yeah, you would kind of turn the soil up a bit, but you use the cardboard almost as a landscape fabric. What I like about the cardboard is that it'll eventually break down and break down into the soil versus the fabric that will just stay there and over time kind of rip up. And so I think you can put even like leaf mulch, you can put some like compost that's not completely broken down, and then you can put your cardboard on top of that. And then on top of your cardboard, you can add like your nice soil. And the cardboard will serve as like keeping weeds and other things from growing. But like I said, it'll break down over time and help with that. I have a hard time growing chives or onions. They don't germinate regardless of the brand. What can I do for better germination?
I wonder if you are putting them too deep into the soil. Just sprinkle them on the top and then sprinkle about a little bit of soil on top, maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch of soil on top. Don't bury them, just put them on top of the soil and give them plenty of water.
Okay. Another question is for crop rotation, should tomatoes and peppers be planted in a different area of the garden each year? So at least in my experience, if you don't have a lot of room to rotate, usually what I do is just because each year you add new fresh soil, then you could plant it in the same location. The idea is that if the plant's been there for too long, it's extracting all the nutrients. But if you replenish the soil every season, I think you should be okay, especially if you don't have a lot of room to move your stuff around. Do you incorporate crop rotation in the beds you showed? Do you add amendments like compost as new layers? Yeah. And so that's definitely one we do in each garden bed. Every spring, I add a new batch of compost on top, and usually that replenishes your soil as well. One of the other things that I do at home is doing cover crop. You can look those up, and that's a nice one that you can do during the fall and winter, rather than leaving your raised beds just open and bare for the sun and the cold and the wind to blow the topsoil off. You can grow cover crop, and you can look them up. They're different varieties. A lot of them flower and produce really beautiful flowers, but they also replenish the soil because they add nitrogen to the soil. And there's varieties for different seasons of the year. So even if you're, for example, you planted a spring garden, but you're not going to be here for the summer. If you leave your garden, you're going to come back to like a mountain of weeds. What you could do is then grow some summer cover crop, and that'll nurture your soil while like keeping weeds suppressed during that time. There's an answer there from Adria about the onions. For someone who asked the question.
What was the question?
That is a question I've gotten a lot lately about onion germination rate. Number one, your onion seeds need to be only this year or last year. Older than about a year or two old, sometimes they just don't germinate. And then a lot of times the seeds are about 75% germination rate straight out of the packet. So you could do, I read that you could do like a 10 seed germination test and just determine what your germination rate is in a damp paper towel. You can still plant those seeds if they germinate, but then you know what is really going on. And onions don't like to be too dry or too wet. They're kind of like Goldilocks.
For onions, I kind of have struggled a little bit, and so I cheat. I go to Home Depot, buy their like sprouted scallions, and then separate them and plant them, and I think I've had pretty good success with that as well. Tony had a question: is there a right way or wrong way to water your crops? Anybody want to take that?
I mean, if you're doing raised beds, I usually just try to see if the surface of the bed is dry, and then I put my finger in if it's dry, and if it's about 1/4 inch down, if it's still dry, 1/4 inch down, then I do a little bit of watering, and I do a very quick watering. But you don't want to put too much water into your beds. like Corey was saying, they need a lot of air in order to produce as well. So.
One I will say, like my tomatoes, I try not to water the leaves. You want to get the soil, and that's an important one with tomatoes. Wet tomato plants, I think, can attract fungus and other diseases. And so when you're watering those, most plants absorb water through their roots, and so you want to make sure that you're watering the soil more than the plant itself.
Yeah, I've seen, I have a couple of raised beds that have drip line kits that are made specifically for a raised bed. And then that way the drip line faces down and it only goes into the soil. So that can be helpful because you don't want anything going up in the plant. Tony, I'm wondering if Tony meant something more specific. He's a master gardener and I wonder if he had a more specific question.
No, you're spot on. I guess I think I'm pretty sure that watering in the morning is more suitable to evening watering, just for the very reason you mentioned, fungus and especially with tomatoes. And so anyway, I thought timing was a factor.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. All right, so we've gone a little over time. We're trying to plan these workshops to be like exactly an hour so that we can get all the information out and then have you go back to your lives and dinner and everything else you're supposed to do. But when you get a bunch of plant garden nerds on a call, it's hard for us to not, talk too much. But again, I appreciate everyone taking the time. If there's no other questions, then I think we're gonna end the talk for today. Like I said, there's a lot of resources in the county. There's a lot of people interested in promoting it. And so if you reach out to any of us, and we'd be happy to share more of our information, and hopefully throughout the year and throughout the season, we can have more workshops with this. Tomorrow, we are having almost a very similar workshop, but it's in Spanish. So if you have any amigos or amigas out there that want to learn gardening in Spanish, please let them know that we'll be doing this presentation again tomorrow in Spanish. And yeah, someone wrote there about this project at Rising Hope. And I'm really excited about this project. It's near where Arcadia is, and it's a church has an amazing food pantry and that we've been collaborating with. And now they're very excited about setting up a greenhouse so that they can grow seedlings and they can give out seedlings as part of their food pantry distribution, which I think is amazing. And so, yeah, I'm very looking forward to doing that. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. We hope to see you at future meetings. Thank you, Stacy and Corey, for taking the time to share with us. And Elias, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Look him up on YouTube for more gardening information. And yeah, thank you.